G'day guys, this is Posadist Pac-Man from Anime Anarchy coming at you loud and proud here over at Weeb Revolution. Yes, this is my first video on the channel since the name change, and honestly, it's a change for the better. We are going to hit up one of the shows which really did launch this channel, Kuroko No Basket. That's right boys, let's get to it, shall we? Love is a bridge from poorer to richer knowledge. Max Shaler. Fate forces people to reform. In fact, you could say that fate forces reforms that we fail to make on our own. Under such a conception, talent is not something to be envied, but rather something that can be said to instill necessary lessons into its holders. Now, I understand how this can come off as a very theistic idea in its implications, but what we intend to show you here today is that through the lens of Kuroko No Basket, we can show you that it is this theory that can be entirely supported by strict materialist means. To paraphrase Epicurus, as we tend to do on this channel, a just man's good fortune is deserved, and the unjust man's will bring out only ruin. Why might it be that someone needs to change but refuses to do so? There can be various reasons, of course, but what it will ultimately come down to, excluding extreme cases of addiction maybe, is belief. Beliefs drive actions, and actions have consequences, and those consequences are objective. Only one who is being foolish rejects objective results, and the unwise person is an unjust one, since they hurt themselves and potentially others by ignoring or not seeing the consequences of their actions. And one of the most damaging beliefs a person can have, one that Kuroko No Basket, and we argue, will inevitably be changed by fate, is that there is such a thing as useless effort. Indeed, the greatest lesson a person can gain through sports, as cliche as it may sound, is the value of trying your hardest when it's virtually guaranteed you will not get the specific results you want. Identity is at the foundation of what human society calls drive. Ambition has its roots in social mobility and is thus inherently forward-thinking and forward-looking phenomena. Different cultures and time periods have placed varying degrees of emphasis on the emotion, typically in extremes of massively discouraging it, because all progress leads us away from the original state of paradise, or Eden, or the status quo, if you will, or prioritizing it at the expense of all other considerations. Naturally, there is something to be said for the noble act of maybe trying to balance the two extremes. In order to do so, however, we must first understand where this drive comes from, why it can be seen as valuable, and then rationally look at the pitfalls of such processes. Through this investigation, we will see exactly what leads to a long-term satisfaction in one's endeavors, and the importance of our bodies in understanding the world we live in. Luckily, smarter people than us have already written about the importance of identity in Kuroko No Basket. To quote Eyeball Sal, this show is really about finding your own identity as a person, about separating yourself from those around you and becoming your own individual, and the challenges that lie within that quest. The generation of miracles, whether they like it or not, are bound together by a name. Despite their unique and powerful talents, they are captive to a single collective identity, born of their time as a team, a unit, which makes use of the individual skill for the benefit of the group. However, at a point in this relationship, the generation of miracles had become one of obligation, as Teiko turned them into commodities used solely to boost the school's reputation. Because of this, they had to split up, only to eventually be defeated by Kuroko, and as a result, to quote Alexander,
and later on, learning the path to the zone beyond the zone is such a breakthrough for him because it is the clearest demonstration that he had been going about this the wrong way.
And this applies to all of the Generation of Miracle members, save for perhaps Momoi. You can consume the two works in full for the details, but what it all essentially comes down to is that the alienation of the self must be avoided if one is to truly know their capabilities. What bears special emphasis in this context is the important need to establish an identity not based on getting winning results, but rather doing your best to win for your own growth and the growth of your team. Growth in this case is the satisfaction of desires, specifically the desire of all sports to measure how you fit, how fit you have become, and of course, how strong you've become mentally and muscle-wise. The stronger the purpose of an activity for the exchange, rather than for the satisfaction of desires, the stronger the alienation, as the Teiko arc successfully established. Did you ever think we'd get characters worse than these bastards? Sports allow you to gain knowledge of yourself and the world through your body by allowing you to measure what you and your allies can do in a concrete way. This knowledge in turn provides you satisfaction, since any fortune that comes your way, good or bad, can be fully understood and appreciated, allowing you to get the most pleasure out of any situation. You can see this in all the Generation of Miracles experiences in learning to love the sport of basketball again. However, there's still the matter of wider society, and we need to consider that when we're talking about fate and talent. And luckily, Last Game gives us the opportunity we're looking for to do exactly that. Now, we are materialists on this channel, okay? But there is a tendency among some of us that there is a sense of destiny to the world. Everything that exists is matter, and that matter is constantly in motion. Motion's determined by the law of contradiction. All of these can be traced back to what came before in a physical way, and if we could know all that came before, we would know all that would come after. Of course, we kind of precisely know, because we are part of that constant motion that moves the world, hence the illusion of free will. There is a contrast between the desire to become the main motion in the world, and the pains and joys of being swept up in the great flow that is everything. These metaphors of motion, that is to say, the dichotomy of fate and drive, are at the heart of Kuroko No Basket. And that's probably why it was one of the anime to get many of us in this community into anime in the first place. Of course, I don't think anyone who initially worked on the story, save for Togodshi himself, really gave a shit about anything high-minded like that, but, you know, death of the author and all that. So when we say that the Generation of Miracles battle against Jabberwock really says a lot about our society, we are aware that on the surface that sounds like a joke, but we're being completely serious. No, the plot itself isn't very deep. The gang gets back together to beat up some racist is a tale as old and uncomplicated as most actual racists. However, there are two ways that is key to exemplifying what we've been talking about in terms of self-inflicted suffering versus self-actualization and the implications of this on wider society. The liberal use of the zone and the publicized nature of this event, again, it's not that any of this was necessarily intentional, but it does logically follow given what we've been seeing in the story and things that we can bring in from real life studies. Quick recap, by the way. Jabberwock is an internationally famous streetball team. The Japanese are called monkeys by these guys, after toying with the opposing team during the game. Riko's dad bets his reputation and finances that the Generation of Miracles can kick their ass. They do, and everyone lives happily ever after. But the devil is in the details, as we will see. For one, the way Jabberwock toys with their opponents for entertainment is obviously supposed to parallel how the Generation of Miracles were at their worst. Only slightly more outwardly disrespectful due to both the Jabberwock being adults and the American culture just being more open with contempt in general. But make no mistake, the spirit of taunting and playfulness is exactly the same. However, this time, Jabberwock extends this view of their opponents being less of themselves to the whole of the Japanese people. While this is mainly done to unite the whole of the Generation of Miracles together and to evoke the audience's hatred, which it does quite effectively, if I might add, this also does two interesting things. One, it is that it retroactively places the previous path the Generation of Miracles was on in an even worse light. Those are, of course, the type of adults they would become had they not been saved by Kuroko and Kagami. Failure to self-actualize can lead to various negative consequences like bigotry and self-inflicted suffering, and this has wider consequences for the whole of the world, especially when paired with insane talent. Despite their talent, Jabberwock cannot enter the zone, which makes sense. The zone is self-actualization in practice. It is the intersection of drive and fate. Murasakibara admits, and Akashi's reaction proves, that the Generation of Miracles never even saw Aomini in the zone, much less achieved it themselves. If Jabberwock is supposed to be a beefed up version of their worst selves from back then of course they can't use the zone. And indeed, this proves that Jabberwock lacks the wisdom that can be gained from sport. And so they behave badly, which further reinforces their ignorance in an endless cycle. In a word, this is what karma is, materially speaking. Only those who have practice and practice a deep practice, which requires the earnestness that comes from a true drive to do one's best and correct mistakes, can stand even to get a foot in the door. The second thing theme-wise is that this expression of disdain, the thing it does inadvertently, is it makes a comment about the potential of the whole nation should they win, which they obviously do. More than just speaking of the negative aspects of belief in a wasted effort, and contrasting it with the joys of teamwork and hard work on an individual level. The use of the zone specifically provides a path for nations to deal with and connect negative aspects of other nations. It's not just that this society we don't want versus the society we do want, but also this is the relationship with others we should have. Peace through strength has been an unspoken motto of the series since episode and chapter 1, and here it reaches its logical conclusion for the whole world to see. A strength that is not based on bringing people down, or is a display of alienation from one's love and passion for life, but rather a strength specifically focused on removing your ego to build yourself up. That is how the zone works. Thus is achieved the perfect balance between ambition and harmony, oneness with the self and with the world. After all, it's not the stronger team who wins, but the winner who was the strongest team. Thanks guys, this has been the writing of Misanthropy Report, the editing of Comrade Calliope of Weeb Revolution, and the voice talent of Posadist Pac-Man of Anime Anarchy. If you want to subscribe to all of the mentioned blogs and YouTube channels, I'm sure Callie will be kind enough to put the links and such in the description. With that, it's been a great time. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Solidarity forever. Weeb on.